burner for towards the end, a little bit of drama. Kendall, I know this was a big one for you. Chargers, Raiders. What's your biggest takeaway coming out of this game? Is it more Chargers focused with how they were ahead and what they did? We also saw some injuries in this game. Keenan Allen goes down, which sucks for them because they have a quick turnaround where they play the Chiefs on Thursday night. You had this one earmarked all week. What's your biggest takeaway coming out of this game? Are you focused on the Raiders or are you focusing on what the Chargers did?
Definitely a lot more focused on the Chargers and how legit they will be this season. But the Raiders put up a good fight. Like, don't let that go shortchanged. I mean, them with Devontae Adams is, good segue from Packers to Raiders. Them with Devontae Adams is very real. Like, they have a new focal point in that offense that they didn't have. Obviously, the passing game used to run straight through Darren Waller, and it kind of seemed like he was the only option for them for a while, and then Hunter Renfrow emerges. So having a three-headed monster with those two and Devontae Adams in a ground game of Jacobs, it is a real potent offense if they can get things going. But, Derek Carr and his inconsistencies in terms of decision-making, it just kind of continues to hold them back. But I do think Devontae Adams has already seen a little bit of what life is like without Aaron Rodgers. I think there were a lot of throws that were left on the field today that deep ball that Asante Samuel Jr. intercepted, that very well probably would have been overthrown, if anything, by Aaron Rodgers. If that's a miss, it's overthrown in a spot where only his guy is going to get it. And Derek Carr underthrows it where Asante Samuel Jr. can undercut it and make up ground and get the interception. So I think he's going to quickly learn what life is like without him. But overwhelmingly, the takeaway from this game is really how legit the Chargers and Justin Herbert are. He is everything as advertised. Anyone that tries to tell you otherwise, don't listen to them. Dude is an elite level athlete, mental processor, all of it. Like, it is so spotless. I put out a tweet mid-game. I was like, he has been so good with his decision-making. I kind of want to see the Raiders put some pressure on him because they really didn't put a lot of pressure on him most of that game. And his pressure stats last year were borderline anomalistic.
Do you think that lack of pressure, is that because you put that more on the Raiders, or do you think the Chargers with, having a new person at right tackle and then having Zion Johnson at right guard in the draft, do you think the Chargers have fixed, granted it's one game, but do you think that lack of pressure in this game, because the Raiders got studs up front, they have a good pass rush. Do you think this is a positive step in the right direction for the Chargers offensive line, or do you think the Raiders were just ineffective?
It's 100% a positive step, but as a comment came in here earlier, it's just week one. Don't overreact to anything. Take it as what it is. It is a positive step in the right direction for a team that's been trying to rework this offensive line for Justin Herbert for a few off seasons now. Yeah. Obviously, getting their bookend at left tackle and Slater was massive, and then, following that up this season, obviously later with Zion Johnson.
Somebody who we all loved. Oh, yeah, like going that draft process. Yeah.
And he had some really great plays in the run game. He just knows what he's doing there. Very polished game. But I just really think from a holistic standpoint, and we really only saw this offense lose potency when Keenan came off the field with that injury. And even then, they were still moving the football. And that goes to show what they've built there around Herbert and the kind of offense that they want to run with. Like, this is a team that they just picked up that dude from Vanderbilt, Horvath. I think he's from Vanderbilt. I could be wrong on that. The fullback. This is a team that wants to show that they can get heavy, but then just run boots out of it and generate explosives. And they did it with consistency all game. So I think it's really exciting from that perspective. And then also seeing this defense with Khalil Mack and what they plan to do on defense was very, very encouraging, and that's without J.C. Jackson. So I think this team is going to be legit and to be feared in the AFC.
Russ, a similar question to you, but the Chargers had two big areas of weakness coming into this offseason. The offensive line, which really kind of cost them, I don't want to say the entire season, because it was apparent throughout the entire regular season last year that the Chargers' O-line was not good, but it really showed up in that kind of winner goes to the playoffs game in week 18, against the Raiders, where they just got owned and lost. And as a result, the Raiders went to the playoffs. And then they also had the defensive line, where they did not have the horses to run Brandon Staley's scheme and structure in front that he was trying to implement in Los Angeles the way he had done. with the Rams. And so they come into this year and they bring in Sebastian Joseph Day, they bring in Austin Johnson, they bring in Khalil Mack. Khalil Mack is known obviously as a great pass rusher, but his ability to support the run from an edge presence is very, very strong and very stout. Yes, he showed up multiple times in that regard. Coming away from this game for the Chargers, Russ, are you focusing more on the performance of that new revamped defensive line for the Chargers, or are you focusing more on the offensive line, or is it equal?
I would definitely say it's equal for me because, you have to, obviously you have to have both, at least to the best that you can. And when you take one of my favorite players in this last draft, in Zion Johnson, who I think can play, I think he can play right tackle. I think he can play guard. He can play anywhere you put him. And you bring him in here, and it allows a guy like Justin Herbert, who we've seen do phenomenal things with the football in his hands. And it's going to allow him to play better. It's going to allow a guy like Austin Eckler do his kind of thing out of the backfield, and allow really probably anybody to do anything out of the backfield there. But defensively, for sure, I mean, Khalil Mack, having 3 sacks today, the Chargers defense as a whole has such interesting pieces to it. Yes. A guy like Kenneth Murray, who has never truly become like that stud LB1 that you thought he would be, but still a pretty good football player in the middle of that defense. You have Derwin James, you have Nazir Adderley, who can kind of be that single high cover one type safety if you need him to be, because he's got that range and ball skills. You've got a guy like Kyle Van Noy on that team now that has got experience. You've got a guy like Morgan Fox who's got experience. You've mentioned Austin Johnson. You've got our son, Asante Samuel Jr. there on the outside.
They draft JT Woods to maybe go with like more 3 safety looks at some point too, or like have that depth there.
Yeah.
Like they've got all these cool pieces.
Yeah. And you don't even have JC Jackson there, like you guys mentioned, but Drew Tranquil, kind of that box safety down in the middle, playing linebacker, maybe in a little bit of a nickel role at times. He had 5 or 6 tackles today, and it's like
a pick.
And a pick. And it's like, that guy wasn't a sexy pick, but he's a good football player, just smart kid. And it was going to take time for him to develop. But it seems like the pieces that they've had to kind of, as we call them, balls of clay, and kind of form them into things like the Kenneth Walker and the Tranquils and all that stuff. Those pieces are coming together. You have a guy like Joey Bosa, who's a superstar. And now you have a guy like Khalil Mack to kind of help take it and put it to the next level. It's great to see for the Chargers. And like, if I'm a Bills fan, and I know we're not focusing just on the Bills, but if I'm focusing on AFC teams, I would be a little bit like, okay, I got to really focus on this team. And maybe I think there was a graphic this summer that talked about like the AFC West, and, Russ with the Broncos and Pat Mahomes with the Chiefs and Herbert with the Chargers. And then like Derek Carr wasn't even like on the graphic.
Oh yeah.
And it was like, and it's like the Raiders weren't even a thought. We know Devontae Adams is going to ball out no matter where he's at, who's his quarterback. The only difference is he's going to ball out with an L, or he's going to ball out with a W if he has a guy like Aaron Rodgers. And that's the difference. The dude had 17 targets today. Yeah. 17 targets. Like, that's ridiculous. And Derek Carr is just going to Derek Carr. He had 3 picks. Like 3 picks.
Devontae Adams, to piggyback on that, so 17 targets. Waller and Renfrow were second with 6 each. Yeah. And Adams had 10 catches, 141 yards, and a touchdown. Waller was second in terms of receptions and yards with 4 for 79. Waller is a stud, and Hunter Renfrow is a very, very talented slot receiver. Both have good rapport with Derek Carr as well. And Adams just came in and just dominated the target share, for better or for worse, for
46% of it.
Just nice percentage. I'm horrible with percentages. Just absolutely dominated target share,
man.
Well, you should have taken the credit and be like, I did it in my head, and just came over and just dominated that target share. And honestly, he looked very good. And, I want to get to the Raiders in a minute, but I was just really, I already have a high bar for Justin Herbert. I think he's a really good quarterback, but he looked so in control of everything today. His pocket movement, his ability to evade, to step up, to sidestep, to drop back, just his rhythm in his drops in the pocket, his movement, his throws on the run, his ball location, just that one, the touchdown to Everett where he rolls out and he's rolling out to his left and he just turns and fires a rope and puts it right on Everett's hands as he's backing up into Teamer from the Raiders, and he just kind of falls backwards into the end zone. Like, just put it beautifully on a spot. Herbert is such a weapon, and they had such a problem last year with not staying ahead of the sticks, and they had the highest yards to go on third down last year. They were not able to stay ahead of the chains. They went with a lot of quick game for the majority of the year, but especially on early downs, and it would leave them with like 3rd and 7, 3rd and 6 consistently. This game, they were able to deal with that a little bit more, despite losing Keenan Allen. Carter played well. They have apparently more depth in the running game now that Joshua Kelly is kind of asserting himself a little bit more into that role. Maybe that helps a bit. The Chargers are a very dangerous team. I think they were a good team last year that needed specific upgrades. And like comparing it to the Bengals, who we talked about, as we started this show, where it was like, well, the Bengals had all these offensive line concerns and they upgraded, but it's not really working out as of right now. The Chargers had specific issues. They upgraded and they're working out swimmingly. Like they picked the ideal guys for their system based on scheme and structure. And it's just week 1, but it's worked out. And then you're going to add someone like a JC Jackson, who's a very good cover corner, especially in man. And you put him together with Asante Samuel Jr. and Davis back there as a depth guy and someone who was a huge free agent love of mine this year, Bryce Callahan. There was that one rep. Callahan's one-on-one with Renfrow in the slot and just locks him up. If he's healthy, which also helps because you have all this depth at the corner position, maybe not high-end depth, but depth regardless. You don't have to lean on Callahan too much. Maybe he stays a little healthy. He can also play a little outside. Very excited for what the Chargers can potentially do. Just so much explosion everywhere, defensively, offensively. Like they can beat you with quick game offensively. They can take shots and beat you with explosives. They could potentially beat you with the running game now with what they got in the backfield and then the upgrades on the offensive line. And then the defense, if they're stout against the run, that's all they were missing. They're going to be able to turn the ball over. If Derwin James stays healthy, he's a huge chess piece on defense. You got this pass rush coming from the outside. Now you got the scheme fit up front, as we mentioned, with Joseph Day and Austin Johnson. Very interested to see where they go. And for the Raiders, it is going to be I'm very interested to see where this Raider team goes and how they fit. You got a new coach. You have a new piece in Devontae Adams. You have a team that I think really overachieved last year, especially with everything that happened early in the year with Henry Ruggs and then John Gruden. They still go to the playoffs. Honestly, you could make the case that they kind of got hosed a little bit on some bad calls against Cincinnati in that playoff game. Who are they and who do they become? I'm very interested. And if I have go ahead.
I just have a question for either one of you or both of you, actually. But, when you look at Justin Herbert and what he was able to do today, 26 of 34, 279, it just goes to show, and I guess, how do you guys feel about a guy that didn't have to target a guy like Mike Williams 17 times like a Devontae Adams? He only had to target him 3 or 4 times today. Mike Williams only had 2 receptions. And I'm not a salty fantasy owner or anything, but whatever. But you have all these targets. You have 9 receivers with 2 receptions or more. 9 weapons, I guess I should say, with two receptions or more. How do you guys take that in as far as Herbert as a quarterback, this offense? I mean, we're seeing guys like Trey McGiddy getting involved in here. We're seeing all these different names, like Keenan Allen. Sure, he got banged up, but like, is that like part of the game plan, you think, or is that just like speaking volumes of a quarterback like a Justin Herbert?
I think it speaks to how Herbert plays the quarterback position. He doesn't throw to necessarily his personnel or where the best matchup is all the time. He'll throw to where his reads take him more times than he won't. Sure, he's going to take the matchup every now and again, that one-on-one fade ball in the red zone every now and again. But for the most part, he's going through his reads and he's finding who's open rather than his best target.
I would agree. Herbert is one of those few QBs, and there's a couple of highlights of it last year where he gets from like 1 to 4 in the progression. Like he gets to everybody. You'll see him go like first read, second read, third read, fourth, boom, and then throws it on a dart with that cannon that he has for an arm. I obviously it's a mix of both. It's got to be the design of the offense and the play calling obviously plays a role. But I attribute a lot of it to Herbert. I think he's one of the few quarterbacks in the NFL who is a true progression style quarterback in terms of he can read the entire field. He can read coverages. He's good at adjusting post snap versus what he saw initially and how his routes fit within that. He, again, like just the ability to get to, you don't see a lot of quarterbacks successfully in the NFL get from 1 to 2 to 3, let alone 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. Also within that, I think that speaks to something we talked about earlier. You need the time to be able to get from 1 to 4. So the offensive line protecting helped out. But yeah, I think that's a lot of that is Herbert, especially with, and I'll give him even more of a kudos because when Keenan Allen was in there, he was feeding Allen early. Allen goes down, and it was like he was just like, okay, I'm just going to read this thing out every time I drop back. And whether he was under center, whether he was in gun, he was just reading everything from however many levels of progression he needed to. I give Herbert a lot of credit for his ability to disperse that ball around. Ooh, good talk. Very high on the Chargers. Let's go to one now.